Well, hello, everybody. I'm Edwin Nagle. I'm revived Compute's Gazette Magazine. Thanks, everybody, for coming out and visiting with us today. I'm not a professional presenter, so please excuse my fumbling around and stumbling around, but really intended this to kind of give an overview of what Compute's Gazette is, why I'm reviving it, and some other things. So unless y'all don't have any questions, if you don't have any questions, it's going to be a pretty short presentation. So I'm hoping to get some engagement from y'all, and happy to answer any questions that you've got, or even ideas. If you've got ideas, it's very early in its infancy. It's a reboot. I've always intended it to be more of a community project than just my project. But we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll start off a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm not real good at doing that. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, like most of y'all. My first computer was a Commodore 64. And it's a little bit of a funny story how I actually got that computer. So when I was a kid, my older brothers, I had 4 older brothers, who the youngest brother next to me was 11 years older than I was. So they were all well older than I was, and I had basically a bunch of dads running around. But my next oldest brother, John, he was really into computer programming, and his first computer, I think, was a TRS-80, and then he ended up with a Commodore 64, and then he got an IBM PC clone. He wrote, he was a game developer later on in life, but he always loved programming video games. So he worked on an IBM PC clone, and when he was gone, he wouldn't let me touch his computer, so I would sneak into his room, and I would jump on his IBM PC and load up Starflight on his computer and play Starflight. And then when he would come back, on this one day, I was doing that, and he came back early, and my mom was lookout, so she yelled and says, "James, John's home." So I hurried up, popped the disk out of the computer, and I had copied files to the hard drive or something, and I popped out into a DOS shell, and I was 8 or 9 years old. I had no idea what I was doing, but I did know how to type delete star.star. So I popped out into DOS, and I was in DOS root, not in the Starflight folder that I'd put on the hard drive, and I typed delete star.star. And keep in mind, he's writing code on this thing all day long. Thankfully, none of the code that he wrote was in the C, the root C folder. So the only thing I really accomplished was, deleting command com, and the computer wouldn't boot and all that. But he knew pretty quick that I was on his computer messing around. And I stayed gone. I took off on my dirt bike, and I was gone for the rest of the day. But after that, so Christmas rolled around. That was probably September, so December rolled around. And got under the tree. I had a Commodore 64. That was his first computer that he gave me. I apologize. Anyway, along with that Commodore, I got a stack of magazines. And I'm sorry, I lost my brother in July 2 years ago. But, lost my brother July 2 years ago. And I still have the Commodore 64 that he gave me June 2 years ago. But anyway, after he was gone, I've always been into vintage computing. I always loved Commodores. And I really just got, I don't know why I'm getting so emotional today. After he was gone, I really just, I've always had my Commodore, so I always picked it up and took it out and played around with it. But then, it seemed like prior to COVID, not much new had came out for the Commodore 64 or any other vintage computer, but there were some projects, and it was really good, but it just seemed like there was an explosion of things happening at some point in the future, sometime in the past decade or so, that retro computing really got big, and people started playing around with them and creating new things with them, and it was really cool. So I got back into it, and one day I pulled my Commodore out of the storage and started playing around with it, and I just never put it back this time. Kept playing with it, and looking at all the cool things, doing all the modifications, and really got into the community around retro computing. I've always been a huge Commodore fan. And when I got that computer for Christmas, I got it with it was his computer. He gave it to me, and my mom and dad got a incredible musical keyboard that came with it. And that was my thing. My other brother, Dusty, he was older, and he was always into more of the hardware side. And they were all musicians too, and they played around with stuff. So I was connecting that Commodore 64 up to the big Fender amplifier and playing chip tunes over the Fender speaker and all kinds of stuff, but really loved the Commodore. The Computes Gazette magazines that I got with them, that's what I learned, start the beginnings of programming, and it was Computes Gazette. I had Compute magazine, I had Run magazine, I had Ahoy, but Computes Gazette really stuck with me. I really liked the format of the magazine. I liked how it made technology and complex technical issues approachable. And it really inspired me to kind of, do wacky, fun things with my computer. So that was part of the reason why I wanted to stick with the Computes Gazette name. Computes Gazette magazine was a magazine that ran from the early 80s to, I think, June 1990 was the final issue, before it merged with Compute magazine, the larger magazine. And then it ran on, I think, until 93. In Compute magazine, and then it became a disc-only version, so the magazine on a disc from sometime in 93 to 95. And I kind of already covered the genesis of the revival, so, well, somewhat. That was the backstory. The genesis is actually one day tinkering around, doing different things. I just thought, hey, wonder whatever happened to Computes Gazette. So I pulled open U.S. Patent Trademark Office website, saw that the trademark had been dead for a long time, and on a whim, I actually registered for the trademark. I thought, hey, this might be cool to do a Computes Gazette newsletter or something, or, just something to get, Computes Gazette back at. Didn't, and the more I kind of got into it, and the more I started, and I initially bought a big printer that I have sitting in my living room that she hates. That I said, hey, I'm just going to buy this big Goliath of a printer and start printing out newsletters and, sending them out and do something with it. But the more I got into it and the more I started investigating and talking to folks, and, everybody has such fond memories of Computes Gazette, Compute magazines and others. So we actually, started putting together, and I'd initially targeted, I don't know, I keep raising the bar on the expectations, but I initially targeted, a newsletter, a 10-page newsletter. Well, I blew past 10 pages pretty quick. Then I said, well, this looks like it could be a real magazine again. So let's go with 40 pages. That was my next target. Blew past 40 pages. So first issue's coming out in July. It's probably going to be closer to 60 pages. Got quite a bit of content for the first issue. We've still got type-in programs coming in. Think it's important. And so much cool things are going on with retro computing now. FujiNet, for example, is an amazing new piece of technology. And I think it opens up so many possibilities. I was talking to a computer programmer the other day, about a type-in program for the magazine. And, trying to prevent, in the modern day and age, nobody wants to type in 1,000 lines of MLX code, machine language code. Number one, it doesn't do anybody any good. You can't really learn anything from typing in machine language code, but you can learn programming from basic programming. One of the things we talked about was potentially writing having a program listing in the magazine for basic code that loads machine language backend from FujiNet. That would be a good use case. But I mean, there's all kinds of cool stuff that's happening today that you could do. But anyway, we'll move on. So yeah, the original Gazette, it premiered in July '83. It was originally focused on Commodore 64 and 128. It was more technical in nature, and I want to say, I say that because it wasn't really technical in the sense that, you know, it's not a Dr. Dobbs journal, for example. But it was technical in the aspect, I think, that it presented technical matter in such a way that it was approachable to anybody reading the magazine. And I think that inspired a lot of people to create a lot of great things. And that's really what I want to see out of the magazine now, is I'm hoping that we can present stuff that people can read and somewhat understand, and maybe it inspires them to do something. Again, it consolidated with Compute in 90 to 93, and it was a disc-only format until 95. So the original Gazette, I know I talked earlier about, you know, the content in the columns. That's what really, even, you know, when I'm going back and looking at things today, kind of revisiting what the Computes Gazette was and comparing it to other magazines, the format of the Computes Gazette, I think, lends itself to, you know, being a good retro magazine. It had features and news, reviews, games. Programming was a big one. It had the type-in programs everybody remembers. You know, the impact and the legacy was education and technologically accessible. That's what I talked about, you know, being accessible to anybody who reads it. Another big thing about the magazine, it was a central hub of information. Prior to the internet, you know, magazines and publications were really the only way to get information. Well, times have changed, but still, you know, it's difficult to find information, to have a consolidated place where you can get all sorts of information about user groups. So we're going to continue the tradition and have user groups updates and listings in the magazine. First issue will have a listing. Central Texas Commodore User Group is going to be in there, among others. So why it ended? Anybody take a guess? Well, the internet was one. Penthouse magazine also caused its demise. So it was bought out by the publishers of Penthouse magazine, but it was actually bought out with the intent to close it down because they had another competitor magazine. But then, you know, it continued out. The internet came around, nobody really read magazines anymore. So the revival, the initial concept and vision is really, you know, it's a Computes Gazette name. I want to keep the same format of the magazine. Fresh updates. The difference is, and I get this question a lot, is, you know, why are you calling it Computes Gazette? Why not just call it Compute? Compute covered everything. Well, you know, the format and the way that it presented information in Computes Gazette was different than Compute. And I still want to keep that same format that Computes Gazette made. I think it was a better magazine. But we are going to expand. We're not going to have just Commodore 64. There's just too much cool stuff going around with, you know, I saw a presentation or a booth here earlier, somebody running a SID chip on a Coco TRS-80. That was just, you know, seeing, you know, Frankenstein machines and other things like that. Vintage computing, you know, back in the day, you know, when Commodore 64 and 128 was big, that was, you know, that was the game in town. But today, there's just so much cool stuff. Vintage computing generally, the one thing that really draws me to vintage computing, and again, I'm a Commodore guy, but I love basically everything. I've got an Amstrad CPC 464 sitting downstairs. They all had their own personality. They're just so different, and there's so much cool things to learn about one another and the different machines. If we don't ever expand our horizons a little bit, then, you know, I think this gives an opportunity for somebody who's maybe not interested in an Amstrad CPC to maybe see one in a magazine and say, hey, that's cool. The evolution of the concept, When I first got the trademark, I had actually put together a concept cover and called it Compute. I had originally intended on calling it Compute Magazine, but the more I kind of started going back and reviewing the older Compute magazines and looking at the Compute's Gazette magazines, it felt right to me to make it Compute's Gazette. So that's the reason I went with it. And again, this was a personal project of mine. It's a passion project. I didn't open up the magazine to say, hey, I'm going to go get rich and make a magazine. That's almost like saying I'm going to go open a restaurant and get rich. It just doesn't work. Magazine publishing in 2025, it's just not a valid business concept. So I'm not in this to make money. I'm in it to, do something with my time and then enjoy. It's my way of enjoying retro computing. The core vision is really just, putting a bunch of cool things in a magazine wrapped around a nice format. Being able to engage with members of the retro community and share. I want to make sure that we're an accessible platform for others who are doing other cool things with their computing. So by all means, if anybody is doing something really cool in retro computing, reach out because we would like to share your story, give you a platform. Some of the challenges, it's definitely been a lot more challenging than I had expected. But content generation, although initially challenging, has actually been pretty easy now. The more word gets out about the magazine, the more people reach out, the more we're happy to talk to people and get stuff in the magazine. It's been really cool. And I'm still chasing down individual stories too. One of the first things that I did was start reaching out to original Compute staff that were still around back in the day. And just by virtue of time, a lot of those folks were probably our age back then when we were publishing that magazine. So they're a lot older now and retired or not around anymore. It's just difficult to get that engagement from the original staff. But I have had the opportunity to connect with a few folks from back in the Compute days, and it's been really positive support from a lot of those people. Next issue will be I spoke with Robert Tenney. I don't know if y'all know who he is. He was the illustrator for Byte Magazine back in the day, and he made all those cool covers for Byte Magazine. He's older now, and I actually spoke with him and his stepson. But we're going to be doing a feature story. It's 50 years of Byte Magazine next month, so we're not sticking completely with Compute. I always thought that those Byte Magazine covers were cool, and it's part of our, vintage computing culture. But some of the other challenges we got is funding and sustainability. So one of the big things that I want to do with this magazine and make sure that it's sustainable. Right now, it's me funding everything. Or it was at first, at least, until we've gotten some subscribers. That's basically offsetting the cost. Been able to pay some writers to come up with some content for the columns. Out of that, advertising is a big thing. It's definitely, we've got folks who are creating new things and a lot of really cool tech for our vintage hardware, and we need to support them. So we'll have some advertising in the magazine and want to make sure that they're taken care of. Let's see, anything else on that? I don't think. So this is kind of an example of some of the pages that's going to be in the July edition. We've got some game reviews. That's going to be a small part of our magazine. That is still going to be there, but we are going to have reviewing some new games that's been created or recreated. We've got an article. We talked to, I don't know, does everybody know what SID Player is? Have you heard of SID Player? So we had the opportunity to talk with Craig Chamberlain, the co-creator of SID Player. We did a lengthy interview with him, and he was completely unaware of the impact SID Player has had on the entire community until basically we reached out to him. Had no idea that it had gotten as big as it had gotten. But yeah, we spent an hour, 2 hours on the phone with him and talking with him, and got the story behind Sid Player and how it all came to be and all that. So it's a really interesting story. Really focused on the art and music side of vintage computing. That was always a fascinating concept for me, thinking about the constraints that are in place and how those constraints really shape the style of art and music back in those days. It's just so amazing to hear a Sid tune play on an old computer and think, wow, I can't believe that was created in 1985. It's just pretty amazing stuff. And the technical challenges behind creating some of that stuff was just amazing. So the community in the future. So that, again, I know I kind of talked about this earlier, but I want the magazine to be community driven. I'm kind of like the director. I'm trying to put all the pieces together, but it doesn't work unless, we get engagement from the community. So I'm hoping that we can get, as people continue to develop cool things for retro hardware, as people keep continuing to do cool things with older retro hardware, with existing stuff, we want to know about it. We want to give that platform to the community to be able to share it with others and hopefully inspire someone else. Current status, like I said, we're pretty much locked in. We've actually, I was locked in into press, but I had a couple more people reach out to say, hey, I would like to get something in the first issue. And we're under NDA on the first issue anyway, so we can't really share. We can't publish until July 18th as soon as I can get it in somebody's hands. So we had a little extra time. So our page number grew a little bit for the first issue. But yeah, the user group updates, other things like that, focused on the community. That's what we really want to do. Have included how you can subscribe, but not only subscribe. If you know of something, if you're doing something, reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you and get your content in the magazine. Share it with everybody else. And like I said, just hopefully inspire somebody else to do something cool. And that's it. So I'll take questions, easy questions, hard questions. Yes, sir.
You say reach out to us. We are hoping to. Who's we? You.
Yeah.
Who's the rest of we?
My wife, Marlene Nagle. Yep. Well, so we are technically a business. It's Compute Publications Incorporated. Although, it's just her and I. And by the way, I have to say this before we kind of get in. I have to give my wife props for her support, and today is her birthday, so happy birthday. She let me come to Vintage Computing Festival on her birthday, so. Yes, sir.
I've got a couple of questions. Are you able to publish any of the articles out of the original magazine? Do you have rights to do that?
So, no, I didn't get the original copyrights. Those are different. So that work is still copyrighted, although I'm not sure exactly where it's at. So it's kind of a gray area. The original owner, Compute Publications Incorporated, out of South Carolina, went out of business or merged with somebody else. So somebody probably still owns the rights to that, although I'm not sure if they even know it or even care about it. So.
The other thing, you mentioned Life Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know this, but there's a computer museum in Roswell, Georgia, which is just north of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
They have an entire display of all the however many years.
Oh yeah.
Life Magazine. So they have them all archived.
Oh, awesome.
Interesting thing to check it out.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, how do you buy Gazette Magazine starting in July?
So you can go to computegazette.com, and there's a pre-order button there that you can buy, and we accept PayPal and Stripe. And then starting July 1st, we will open up subscription links. Subscription links aren't open right now because if you subscribe today, then you're going to be charged for a month ahead, basically. So we'll open those up, subscription starting July 1st. But today you can pre-order the first issue.
Have you decided on like publishing model? I mean, is it quarterly?
Monthly.
It's going to be monthly.
It's going to be monthly.
You know, content is so hungry. As soon as you hit publish, it's hungry for more.
Yep, like I say, I originally thought that content publishing monthly was going to be an issue, but the fact that we've expanded that out to multiple retro platforms, there's more than enough stuff going on to be able to, I'm pretty confident we can publish enough interesting things. But yeah, that's the intent. Now, if the community doesn't support a monthly issue, then we may look to move to quarterly later, but we've had a really good response on the first pre-order. I'm hoping that translates into the next August issue. We're getting a lot of content. We're probably, I want to say 70% done with the August issue as far as content-wise already, so hopefully we're going to stay a month ahead. Any other questions?
How did you convince your wife to get into this? You have a good wife.
The best. I don't know. She's always been very supportive. I've got all kinds of crazy, wild ideas, and I think probably early on she just stopped questioning me.
Yeah, you should see my house. It's all vintage computer stuff everywhere, but it's nicely done.
I see somebody else getting a mean look. Yes, sir.
Two-part question. One, since you did not get the rights to the old magazines and their content, that means that type-in programs can't use the old
MLX or
whatever.
yeah.
Right? You're gonna have to either come up with something new or.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we do have some type-in programs. There is not going to be any error checking on those programs, at least for now. So we don't have any way to error check those programs. So if you fat finger, you're on your own to debug. But
Second half of the question is, the joy of having a large publication was that I could write my program for the Commodore 64 because I'm a Commodore guy, but somebody else was the TI-99 guy and he could port it.
right.
Since you may be a Commodore person, I don't truly know if your wife is the Atari 800 programmer that she might be. So if I write a program for one machine, it may only be for one machine. It's not going to be imported in unless I port it.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So we're not doing any independent work as far as porting programs. And I mean, if you write a program and submit it for a Commodore 64, we'll publish it for a Commodore 64. Somebody else may see that program and say, hey, I'd like to have this on a TI-99 and publish that for a TI-99. And by the way, we do have a TI-99 program that's written specifically for the TI-99 platform. But a lot of the stuff that we've gotten so far has been, very platform specific. But it also showcases those platform strengths too. So, for example, one of the programs that we'll be publishing is graphics routines for a TI-99, which wouldn't necessarily be well suited to be ported for a Commodore 64 anyway. So
You're going to have GitHub repo publish stuff so people can contribute that way as well?
that's a good idea.
If they want to port something, then they can just,
Yep.
submit it.
That's a very good idea. We'll probably set that up. Like I say, I don't have all the answers yet on this stuff, so by all means, if anybody has any suggestions or anything else, feel free to let us know. Yes, sir.
So besides helping with spreading the word about it, is there any other ways we can help besides subscribing?
Spreading the word, subscribe. You know, submit ideas if you have any ideas. You know, share information, especially around user groups. That information is really hard to get a hold of. You would think in the digital age of the internet that we would be able to find retro computing user groups, but it's very difficult to find, especially groups that, you know, like to meet in person and that kind of thing. So we want to make sure that those are included.
Will you be able to ship overseas?
We can, and that is something I need to figure out more about cost, because with all the tariff stuff going on and all that junk, it's complicated. But yeah, I mean, we're small enough to where we can work with pretty much anybody who wants to subscribe, and we can figure out a way to get them something. All right. Yes, sir.
You said the magazine would be aimed to be more accessible to people who haven't quite gotten into retro computing yet.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of articles or maybe like the typing code would that entail?
Pretty much anything in the magazine. You know, everything that we're writing about is written from a perspective of not necessarily somebody who has no idea what a computer is, but it's written from the perspective of, hey, I know enough about computing that I can read this and understand it. And it also gets, you know, more in depth for, you can kind of follow the breadcrumbs, for example, to understand what it is that's being talked about. Even if you don't fully understand it, it'll give you enough information to where you can go find out more about it. And the type-in programs themselves are, I mean, I think that's the way probably all of us learned to code at some point in this room, was typing in a program out of a magazine and then figuring out what works or what doesn't work.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then the agony of flipping that power switch at some point. Should I not?
Yep.
You include hardware projects here?
Yes. Actually, we have a tech bench column coming out next month. We're doing a RAM link build. Got a contributor that's building a RAM link, and he's going to be documenting the whole thing for the Commodore 64. But yeah, definitely want other platforms as well. If anybody's doing any hardware projects or anything like that, we'd like to know about them. Awesome. Well, I sure do appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to come visit with us today. We're here until Sunday. We've got a booth set up if you want to come by and talk, share ideas, anything else, feel free to come up and see us. Other than that, you know, really look forward to getting the first issue out and getting it into your hands in July. Really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.